All right, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of a roguelike themed roundtable. For once, we have the iteration, I guess, working for us for our roundtable. We have another panel lineup to be discussing roguelike elements. And if you are a developer working on some would like to join for a future episode, please get in touch with us. But before we get to our main topic, as always, we'll give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. So let's go starting from Simon and work our way around to Seth, Tomo, then me. So, Simon, go right ahead.
Hello, I'm Simon Boxer. I run a studio called Twice Different. We're a small indie crew. Our most recent release is the roguelike card crawler Ring of Pain. And yeah, we're interested in bringing fresh experiences, like different kind of mechanical and genre hybrid mashups to the roguelike and strategy space.
All right. And to Seth.
Hey, I'm Seth Goldberg. I run the Strategy Informer, which is a review and discovery system for, well, not system, but website and Twitter, all kinds of different angles for discovery of strategy games. Former game developer, and I do indeed at this point work with a couple of other indie companies on strategy games.
All right.
And my name's Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for a long time. I often get it wrong, but it is somewhere between 23 and 25 years. My claim to fame is being the creative director of the 2004 Spider-Man game. And in recent times, or the last decade or so, I've been helping running a small indie studio / client work studio called Hyperkinetic Studios. We have a game on Steam Early Access. It's been there too long, called Epic Tavern, that's all about the disassembly of storytelling.
All right. And for myself, I am Josh Placer. I run the site and everything here, Game Wisdom, where I talk a whole lot about game design and game dev. And I've written a book on roguelike design, game design deep dive roguelike. So it's a genre that I am particularly interested in, to say the least. So it is great to have everyone on, and for those of you watching this live, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions roguelike-ish related for our panel, let us know. But for our topic for episode 1, we're going to save the what is a roguelike topic for another time, just so that everyone gets used to us before they pull out the pitchforks and torches and come after us. And we are going to be starting off with kind of the mainstreaming of roguelikes. Yeah, I wish too, Thorn. When do we get the RTS roguelike? Maybe we'll answer that by the end of this discussion. Who knows? But one of the biggest aspects of kind of the growth of roguelikes, roguelites, however you want to describe the term, has been this kind of mainstreaming that has occurred over the past decade. We've seen the likes of The Binding of Isaac, Spelunky, deck builders, card battlers, RPG roguelikes, and even in the last 4 to 5 years in particular, we've even seen AAA developers or even the AAA space getting in on this, with of course the success of Prey Mooncrash, Returnal. Could even count something like Bloodborne's Crucible Dungeons as a kind of late roguelite, maybe? I'm not sure we'll get too far into that term. But I guess the first thing I wanted to kind of go around the table here and ask everyone is, what are your thoughts on kind of if we had to distill down what roguelike elements are, what is distilling a roguelike? What do you think that means? And if anyone wants to start, feel free to jump in. Oh, you were muted again, Tomo.
I'll start because that way Simon can clean up my definition. Because my definition is also kind of just how I feel about it. But I feel like somewhere in the early 2000s, right, the genre of new roguelikes, the kind of Steam, indie, boutique-style games, started this genetic reproduction and evolution. And it just happened to use rogue-like games, sort of, as its essence. And as a side effect, games just started to take that on, at least in that space. And so my definition of roguelike was inspired by, but so-and-so tried to just make whatever they wanted. And to be fair, it's a bit of a newer definition because we've been able to see such a long-term trajectory since the early 2000s. But these sort of elements that were lost to console mainstream, sort of like New Game Plus, sort of like RPG light experiences that expand into the meta experience. I think all those things are kind of pieces of yesterday's gaming, especially like old school PC gaming that got that died in the PS2 Xbox era, and PC brought it back, sort of in the Steam boutique developer or indie developer space.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting insight. I think also, like you, I'm more intuitive about what it is because I come from the angle of wanting to design something interesting and fun, and just happening to like roguelikes and roguelites and the mechanics that are involved. So I'm more interested in like hybridizing things that I like from it, and aiming towards certain goals, like short play session. Like roguelikes are perfect for short play session because you can sit down and have one game, in half an hour, or under, and that's as a result of permadeath and the procedural generation bringing all this randomness and variety to the gameplay. So I think with modern, like, I guess I refer to it as like modern roguelikes or roguelites as opposed to traditional roguelike, where this is kind of where I focus, and maybe like where traditional has grid-based and is bound to a very like defined rule set, especially by kind of the purest definitions. I'm happy to pick and mix, like, just from the best of the, like, whatever suits the game direction that I'm going in, really. It's generally the procedural, the permadeath, and kind of aiming for short run sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Being the old man of the group, I I certainly look at the newer generation of likes, like Binding of Isaac and the more action oriented one. I kind of discount those as being in the rogue category. I mean, the first roguelike I think I played was Temple of Apathy, which goes back to 82, 80, 81 or something like that. So, I mean, I'm not at the cusp of playing Rogue first or anything like that, but certainly quick. So it's the procedural generation that kept me hooked on these games, and how you could go through this and you could get, the ludomatic results it was essentially a slot machine. And if we look at how it spread, that slot machine eventually became the entire mechanic behind action role playing. So I think if you, if you look at the homogeny of it, and then the lights coming out and adopting the deck builder, and now you're seeing games that people can play for 1,000 hours. Or, with Binding of Isaac, there's a streamer who made more money on streaming Binding of Isaac than the developer. So there's a little bit of craziness going on with what's capable in these games and how it hits these addiction factors. Or not factors, but addiction, not indicators, but yeah, how it hits your dopamine.
Features.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, I think I lean to what Simon was saying about this kind of distillation into runs. And I think the idea of a run is one of the more essential elements of a roguelike, or whatever, however we want to kind of square the circle of the terminology. This idea that you have... Oh, sorry, my internet just went out for a second. That's not a good sign. But you have this idea that you're not playing a game for 10, 20, 40, 100 hours. You are playing these individualized runs. It could be a 30-minute run, could be an hour or 2 hours, and you're getting your fill. That time works. It is meant to be, a complete experience, win, lose, or draw. But then as you play through the game or through each run, you are getting a completely or a experience that is not the same, that you cannot just count on the same exact things to happen. And that kind of variance, I think, has been one of the more essential aspects that we've seen kind of spread to all these different games. That, again, instead of having to spend 8 hours playing a game, you're spending 8 hours playing maybe 8 1-hour individualized runs. And I personally like this. I think, I'm not sure if I would be I may be the second oldest, but I'm not sure where I'll fall in the old man of the group. But for me, I'm not as huge of a fan of traditional roguelikes. The last one that I think I did genuinely enjoy was the Shiren the Wanderer series, which that began this kind of more adopting of persistent elements that you can carry over from run to run or play to play.
Yeah,
I'll just add.
go for it.
Oh yeah, I'll just add one of the things that I love about roguelikes, which kind of talks to some of those points with the variance, is the player story is often about getting really overpowered. It's often about a positive experience that you have, where other game genres, especially like multiplayer genres, people might come away with experiences that were just horrible. Like the bad thing is the dying part. Where in this, like, and that's what they remember, like dying in a really terrible way. But this is kind of focused around breaking the game a lot of the time, especially for single player games.
Well, and it's interesting, right? There's everything we talk about in the roguelike environment in terms of the kind of the key features really connives to shelter a given playthrough, give it space to be potentially absolutely insane if need be, and also shelter you from the negative consequences of it being just a terrible bad luck, nothing went right playthrough. I think there's something in there that's like really somehow meaningful and sort of engaging to medium and long term for your, everyday player.
I think Simon hit it on the head with the overpoweredness and the what I like to call the power fantasy of just being able to just destroy everything, because you start off and you're just getting beat up all the time. Maybe you'll get lucky and find that cool item, just be able to ink through, and then run after run after run, you suddenly get powerful enough that you're able to complete a level or a playthrough, and you're like, yes, this is great, and then you start looking for the synergies behind it and really dominating the game. The thing is, though, is that the developer has to really work on that power curve so that there's that gradual increase without making them completely upset at the beginning. Or completely dominating where there's no point in playing. You need to be accounting for the end game with advanced synergies, unlocks. I'm sure since Simon developed one, he's experienced trying to balance.
Yeah, balancing is well. I mean, we get the easier job with a single player game because we don't need to, balance it for PvP, and it can be a bit more. People can break it more, and I'm okay with it being broken. But generally, we want it designed in a way where it's not like you just get one item and then the whole thing's won. So there have been situations where we've had items that are too powerful and can just be, carry you with one other thing maybe. And that's when I guess we want to look at nerfing. But yeah, generally, yes, it's a privilege to design in the single player roguelike space and be able to have ridiculous combos.
Well, and I think it's something that sometimes I felt like when I was in the console space that my peers would get uncomfortable at the idea of offering the player too much power. And for good reason, right? Because if they get too much too soon, they'll wear out the experience before you want them to, and they'll churn out. But it's the fundamental structure of the roguelike that allows for that to be kind of, it's like a feature that you can break the game as long as it's not too frequent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that was like kind of the joy of playing The Binding of Isaac. That like when I interview Edmund, like he basically said like he does not give a damn about balancing that game. Like if an item is overpowered, he's gonna leave that in. He wants those super spiky items as well as those items that can just nosedive a run. And I think to piggyback off what Tomo said, that there's this idea. I think like for like consumers, that I think there's still that subset of consumers who do not like this idea of randomness in their games. That they don't like this concept that if I play the game and I do X, Y, and Z this time, I win. But if I do X, Y, and Z this time, I lose. And what the hell? Why is this game cheating on me? And I think a lot of kind of like the idea of like mainstreaming has been trying to get more people to accept RNG and probability in their games.
Well, having
that's
a
really
hidden
interesting.
card game. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, randomness is something that we've tuned a lot over time. That's like the main thing, main feedback that we get, especially having made a very difficult game where the problem-solving format is not like other games. So people might come in expecting it to be like Slay the Spire, and it's not at all. But the randomness is also a nice, comfortable out. So a lot of people will come in, not have any game knowledge, which is required, and not understand the strategy completely and just say, oh, randomness killed me, even though they don't understand like what mechanically they could have done better as well. So it's definitely used as a comfort. And also, I mean, there are definitely times when it is unfair. And yeah, there's a real balance to strike with how much RNG you have in your game.
Mm-hmm.
Being a big card player, both like Magic and poker, the randomness is something that you need to embrace. Mm-hmm. But you have to look at it as it's an optimization and mitigation scenario. It's not necessarily randomness. You're trying to play the most optimal play that you can with what you're given. And maybe that's a poker thing. Maybe that's where that got beat into my head. But I mean, I kind of think it was, back when I started playing Magic, which must have been like 94. It was like, all right, you've only got 60 cards. At first we built like 300 card decks. Then we realized that's just going to be random as hell. So you trim it down to get the best possible chance of drawing the card you need at any given time. And 60 was the way to go, and a lot of games carried that forward.
Yeah,
and
so go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, like, human beings have an uncertainty range that they're comfortable in, and it's not actually all that wide. You get too much uncertainty, and the randomness starts to sort of break down my attention, right? And I'm like bored because I can't track patterns. And if there isn't enough uncertainty, then even if I'm wrong, I believe I understand what's going to happen next so well that I don't care what happens next, and I'm out, right? I can't prove, you're not able to prove to me that you're random, even though I mistakenly think that you're completely predictable. So inside that range, there's a real important game to be played, right? It's really hard. I mean, RNGesus is the bane of so many developers.
As somebody who's playing strategy games, roguelikes, and gacha games all at the same time right now, I can certainly attest to RNGesus smiling or frowning upon me at certain times of the day. And I want to go with what Seth was just saying about kind of the mitigating and optimization, because I think that is another essential aspect of these games. Because as anyone who's played any game that is built on RNG and probability, we know that you want to avoid Hail Mary plays. You don't want your entire run to be built on, okay, the 2% chance I get that one item and I'm going to win every time. You want to build different strategies. And this is something that we saw with a game like Slay the Spire. Each class has these different archetypes. So that if I'm trying to play as the Ironclad, let's say I'm not getting the cards I want for this one, I have a plan B or I have a plan C. And it's the same thing with XCOM, that if you've watched anyone who's played XCOM, I'm talking like high level, the ones who play on the highest difficulty, they will not have as many bad plays as you and I. And it's not because they've hacked the game, it's not because, they're clicking the button faster to get better probability. Is that they know what are the smart plays. They know what are the safest plays that I can make, so that it's not me hopefully, pleading to RNGesus that this 20% chance shot is going to hit and then I'm going to win this whole match. And if it doesn't hit, I've lost. The game has cheated me. How dare those developers throw those numbers at me?
Well, it's funny you mentioned RNG and XCOM in the same sentence, because everybody's convinced that the random number generator in XCOM is horribly broken. But the perception that could be, well, it could be right, but it's a perception error. We can't really, as humans, validate that some random number generator is not streaky or giving you bad results or is not designed to screw with you. You need millions and millions of data points to really come to that conclusion. And if you're having a bad run, a 98% chance to hit and missing, sometimes that happens.
It has happened to me. It has definitely happened to me.
I had a poker run one time where for about 5 months, my aces were getting cracked about 85% of the time, which it should be the other way around. You should win with aces 80% of the time. I played very mathematical poker. I was just basically playing the numbers. Didn't matter what I had. So you sometimes get in these runs, and I couldn't say, oh, the card algorithm is messed up or they were screwing with me. No, it was just that's the way it goes. There's no memory to random numbers from one pull.
It's so tricky, right? This range of randomness that's tolerable to our users, and at the same time, the outer limits of the range of randomness you offer has to be outside the boundaries of what they're comfortable with. That way, what's inside the boundaries happens at a sufficient frequency. But it takes a lifetime to prepare yourself to be okay with a bad streak.
Yeah, and I think you really do have a different mindset, I think, after you play enough roguelikes and any game built on RNG like that. Because it can be very frustrating to people. Again, this idea of, hey, play this game and there's a chance that you will lose and there is nothing you could have done to do it. Have fun with that.
It's also interesting that randomness facilitates more casual players. The more randomness gives, the more casual players a better time. So it's the more hardcore players that are often, will dispute getting a bad roll.
Yeah.
At the same time, those hardcore players don't complain when they get a good streak.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we've seen this huge push into loot boxes and gacha design for a lot of mobile games and stuff along those lines. Because in a very, I guess, I'm not sure this would be a good, bad, or neutral way, RNG is oftentimes that great equalizer. That you can spend $10,000 in a gacha game, not get a single pull that you want, and you can have someone who just shows up one day, just hits the free button, and oh, I got the best luck of the draw. It's again very akin to gambling casinos. It's the same thing they try to push at. Anyone can get that jackpot.
Yeah, I feel like there's something about there are all these conversations about what is ethical and what is exploitative in various game mechanics, right? And it's not at all clear. We haven't figured that out. but something in the story about, I heard a story about someone who walked into a casino, put in a single $5 coin, and made $400,000. First thing they had ever done in a casino. And that person eventually had a collapse as a side effect of gambling addiction. So there's this, like, as we broaden the results, right? If you're the lucky/unlucky person to be at the absolute extremity of those results, it's a totally different experience for you. The overwhelming majority of us kind of walk our way through the middle of those results, and we just kind of have the same experience as each other. And it's just really hard to kind of figure out, like, we don't know yet, right? There's something in there, though, that gives us insight about what supercharges our imagination.
Well, you had mentioned Hail Marys, and that's an interesting thing when I tie it into what Tomo just said, because the slot machines are the most popular game in the casino, and they are the worst odds. You will never get ahead in slots if you continue to play. It's just impossible. I mean, that's the same thing with blackjack, but you've got a much smaller house head. And the same thing with gachas. The odds of pulling those super rares are just horrid.
Yep.
Absolutely horrid. And people love them. They're the most popular games out there on mobile right now. And even slot games are incredibly popular on mobile. So people like those Hail Mary, don't they?
Do you think it's people like the experience of, getting the chemicals that a skin and box will release in your brain kind of thing? It's more like an addiction. Well, I guess this is, my take on it. They like what the addiction gives, but the addiction isn't pleasant in itself.
Yeah, and
well, sure, yeah. There's definitely the dopamine cycle and the addiction cycle.
And that's where it ties into exploitative game design as well. Like,
yes,
dark patterns to encourage people to spend more than they would objectively be comfortable with.
Oh, and there's a whole lot of talking about that in my next book when I talk about mobile design and trying to find like an ethics code of ethics for those kinds of games. So there's a lot there, but we gotta be careful. This is not the gambling roundtable. That will be another topic.
Back to roguelikes.
One thing that I wanted to talk to the group about, and this is something I especially want to ask Simon as you develop a roguelike as well, has to do with, I guess, the viability of choices. Because this is something that, as we were talking about earlier, and to what Tomo was saying about uncertainty, that there's a very fine line between I need to know what I need to do to succeed versus, if anything can happen, maybe this run I get nothing and I lose, the next run I get everything that I win, of, trying to keep somebody engaged. And I think one of the challenges I see from a lot of roguelikes, however, the whole spectrum of them, is that kind of balance. The idea, again, of can I make the Island of Misfit Toys build work? I've had Slay the Spire runs, I've had Darkest Dungeons, I've had Bind of Isaacs, whatever, where nothing that would be considered, meta or great drop, and I can make that work. Just as I've had runs where even no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, nothing's coming together. Like, the pieces are not fitting, and I've lost. And the question I want to ask you into the table is, how do you approach balance, again, or any kind of design, when you cannot predict what the player is going to have? Because like we've said, if you just make every item overpowered, there's no challenge. I get one item, I win every single time. So how do you, I guess, fall on that spectrum of, making this stuff good enough, but not too good?
Yes, that is an interesting question. At first, when we released, the game was a lot harder than it is because we've added another difficulty mode and then sort of let players ease into the base difficulty a bit more and given more agency over. So we've changed a lot of features along the way to give more agency, basically. Like originally stat drops were completely random. Now they're a choice between different types of stat drops, and it could be like min-maxing, it can be stat trades, like one for another kind of thing. So our item effects are also somewhat balanced by the whole stat system, in that you can have amazing item effects which can carry you through with lower stats, or you can have higher stats that make up for having more generic items. So one balancing aspect can be that, like putting more decent stats on things which have worse item effects. And then overall, it's got it results in kind of different directions that you can play. That can be more based on the item effects that you get or the stats that you're kind of building towards. So that's one of the ways. And yeah, I guess it's just been a lot of tuning over time. Like I really like the idea of like I love drafting games. I don't like constructing decks. So I like the idea of like making the best, like Seth was saying, making the best of a bad time, like dealing with chaos and mitigating that, along with the strategy and how you work to each dungeon that you're in. So, like Ring of Pain specifically is a game where you probably would die if you tried to kill everything in every dungeon, and a lot of people go in with the expectation that they are going to kill everything in every dungeon and then die. So yeah, you could, there's a real balance to be played across like what you're giving the player, but also how you're setting up dungeons and the structure of the game as well.
And as Videus in the chat, we're saying that we're reminiscing for the old chaotic days of Ring of Pain.
Well, you can stay on hard mode, I guess.
I like what you said there, Simon, about giving the player agency. I think that is a very big aspect of, again, trying to make RNG and probability appealing to a wide audience. The player needs to have some kind of control over what their options are, what they're going to be. Like, for myself, for a lot of games, I often do get like kind of like decision lock. So I will often just let the game decide, okay, give me a random character, random perk, random cards, 1, 2, 3, let me go, let's start running it like that. And one of the things I think we've seen with kind of, again, this mainstreaming of roguelike design is that idea of the player should be having some input as to, I guess, how the run goes. This was something I think we saw a whole lot in Slay the Spire. This idea that instead of the game just giving you a card reward, it lets you pick from a choice of 3. It lets you pick your artifacts. And it is, I think, from a psychological point of view, or from even just a gameplay point of view, it offers a different experience as to the game just said, okay, here's your reward, and, who cares what you say about that? And I think you do need to like kind of let the player get in on that, because I think it leads to the game being more interesting, and also I think helps us smooth over that RNG. Because you can say, oh, the game gave me bad cards. You chose every single card from each reward. And it kind of helps, again, this idea of, I think, trying to teach the player, how to make lemons out of lemonade. Or how to make lemonade out of lemons. That's better.
You could also go too simple. Like at first, we just had I'm really interested in the idea of simplifying mechanics down to very basic decisions. So Ring of Pain is like played with 2 to 4 decisions at any time, or 2 to 6 if you have spells. But at first, it was just when you get a chest, you choose from 2 items, and that was too little. So we needed to add the reroll mechanic to give people access to a lot more choice within that.
That also helps set up. That's exactly what I was going to bring up, by the way. It also helps set up the synergies, because you're seeing what set that choice of loot is in, so you can better tailor your build without necessarily knowing what the overpowered synergies are, looking up a wiki, being on Discord. Because, I would say that maybe 90% of the players of any given game don't look up the best strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that helps balance things as well for those people.
Well, there's an interesting shape I think we're describing here, right? Where the playthrough can go terribly wrong. That is a supported feature of the game. And so as a side effect, it induces us developers to create legacy advantages, right? By repeated playthroughs slowly steps you forward in power. And then on the other side of it is how much randomness is okay. Because the most possible is theoretically the best, right? Because if I can find the most amount of surprise in the failures and in the successes, that makes me happy. But so we're playing chicken with the maximum amount of randomness and then trying to consolation prize the user whenever things end by ratcheting them forward. Is that the essence of the roguelike genre?
I think that's like some roguelites go that way, like Rogue Legacy or anything with persistent progression. I'm not into grind at all, so I don't like doing that.
Oh, you don't even, and you don't allow it.
No, we don't have any persistent progression other than unlocking extra content, similar to Binding of Isaac, I guess. But yeah, a lot of games do that kind of more old school in some ways approach, like the old Final Fantasies. You see people playing the same like bosses again and again to get strong enough to do whatever. And it's also a lot harder in the turn-based game space. So we can't rely on people's reflex as a failure point. And making a roguelike where anyone can come in and theoretically win it in their first run is it's a lot more challenging than when there's action involved. But that's something that I would like to be possible, and that's not at all possible in ones that are gated by permanent progression.
Although there is some amount of permanent progression in the evolution of the understanding of the system by the player, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, game knowledge. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And that, I think, again, like going back to what we were saying earlier about understanding how to mitigate bad decisions or optimize, player knowledge is often one of the most important aspects. Once you understand kind of the rules the game presents itself, not only does it mean you can make smart decisions, but you're not as reliant on certain items or certain things to appear if you're good enough to not need them. And again, like, we're not talking about the differences between a roguelike or a roguelike. That is its own topic for a future one. And we're still able to do this before the mob gets us. But it is tough, I think, again, to get that balance right of these choices. Because I've played a lot of roguelikes where even if I try and do the right thing, even if I have the perfect build, or let's say, all the pieces fall together for this build, I can still get messed up because I run into that one enemy or that one boss that completely shuts that down. This was, I think, one of the complaints about Slay the Spire, that the final bosses in Act 3, each one is pretty much designed to counter a very specific form of play. So if you get the wrong boss to your build, it doesn't matter how overpowered that build is, that boss is going to wreck you. And I've had that happen more times than I can count.
Going back to those streamers that made a ton of money on streaming these games, they seem to be able to walk through that and have session after session, day after day of wins. And I don't know how they pull it off. Everybody else is getting countered. They seem to, is it, just, it's a live thing. It's not pre-recorded, so they can't be just editing it. I don't know. Some people are just good, right? They've figured out all the possible synergies, and they know that no matter what boss they get, they've got a build that, even in Plan C, can counter it or can get past it.
Well, but the 99.9th percentile of player knowledge is something as developers we shouldn't worry about too much, right? They've played it out. They've gotten the most that they could out of it. And yeah, maybe they can use that extreme level of knowledge as a status benefit for their audience, perhaps.
Well, remember, I come from MMO development, so when we saw an edge case, we nerfed it.
If only we had enough testing resources to find all the edge cases, though, nowadays.
Good point.
And
Ultima Online was much simpler than Epic Tavern, I guess.
I miss those days. I feel like I didn't know better. So in the context of like Spider-Man 2, we had, as far as I know, we were the first conventional game developer to exceed Excel's maximum row count in our bug database.
Wow.
But that was also in the time when we were massively expanding the number of platforms you wanted to release at the same time, and it happened to be a really big open world. Open world was a little bit new, but that wasn't a carefully controlled endeavor. It was random. We stumbled into it, and then we were like, "Whoa, what do we do now?"
Capitalize.
And
make a great game.
Since then, haven't even had I've never had more than 10% of that many testing resources ever since, and it's usually more like 1%.
So when Facebook development got really big and some companies just exploded into billion-dollar enterprises, as they fell over their own feet to success, they'd have to go around town and buy up computers from anybody and everybody who would give them to them to do server room stuff. So, when you become a success, it's not always good.
It's weird, right? That just, not related to roguelikes, but in the period of time when mobile games went from nobody to literally everybody, the world wasn't 100% ready for that, right? It didn't have the infrastructure to handle that.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure, Slay the Spire, experienced that with their success. Dorf Romantic, which not really a roguelike, but their success was completely out of nowhere, and they had to get a bridge loan so that they could continue, and it was based on the fact that, they had so many sales.
Well, that's nice. I'm glad that worked out then.
Yeah.
Though, just to talk about Slay the Spire some more, I feel like it's a good example of how genre and features don't necessarily make the roguelike alone, right? It's the balance of experience somewhere. There's a abstract definition of roguelike, and it evades all of our sort of concrete game design feature language, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So here's something that I was thinking about. Is we were talking about kind of like how roguelikes have become more accepted. How there was like this period where it didn't seem like it was really growing outside. There are two games that I always turn to, and that is Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter and Dead Rising, both done by the same team. And Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, I think that was like early 2000s. It was PlayStation 2 era. And that was a game that, in a lot of ways, it had roguelike elements to it. When your party dies, you restart your entire run. There was persistence involved. And it was a game about this kind of replaying the same hour or 2 hours of story chunks. And a lot of people hate it. I enjoyed that game, but it did lead to the Breath of Fire series just being killed. And then that team went on to do Dead Rising. And Dead Rising, again, is a game built on you are repeating the same 3 days of content, but it's more focused on that persistent layer of, your level stays when you run by run. And eventually you'll hit that point where you'll be strong enough just to beat the entire game. And I mean, we could certainly argue that Dead Rising could be like kind of like the prototype for a lot of the roguelite design that would then become popularized over the last decade.
That would frustrate the hell out of me, though. You know, in an RPG environment. Breath of Fire is weird too, because that's the one where if you lose a character in a fight, it's gone forever, and even if there are, or am I thinking of a different game?
Could be a different game. You may think of Fire Emblem.
Oh yeah, Fire Emblem. But you know that would annoy me because you can now look at that as a roguelike style system because it's locking content out from me. You know, I won't see that character's story, or I won't. I guess Banner Saga would be a better example to you. Which I do feel that Banner Saga is an RPG with roguelike elements and narrative elements.
I really like Banner Saga.
I need to go back to that one at some point. I've bought, I think, one or two of them. I've like spent maybe like 20 minutes total in that game.
It's a weird game because it has a very novel turn-based combat system, as well as having a really novel approach to telling a dynamic story through its machinery, I guess. I don't know. It's very interesting. And, I mean, the visuals are outstanding.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned story and that Asmodeus in chat mentioned Hades, as well as Tomo as well. Because Hades, I think that's another really good point I want to touch on for the table. And as a time check, we've been going for about like 46 minutes. So I figure we'll wrap things up in like the next like 15 or so minutes, if that works for everyone. So with Hades, I think out of all the roguelikes and lights and all the distillation of roguelike design, it is the only game that I think immediately comes to my mind as one that integrates roguelike elements into the story. We could maybe argue that, you know, Dark Souls and the whole Souls-likes have also had similar cues to it, but to my mind, I think Hades is the game that really gets this idea of telling a story built around this idea of you're trapped in a loop. And again, we could even go to Returnal as well. I have not played Returnal yet. If it ever comes to PC or if I get a PS5, that will change. But I wanted to kind of ask or go around the table here, like, what are your thoughts on kind of like Hades from a storytelling perspective? And where do you think we could go in terms of storytelling with roguelike mechanics and elements in it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, well, I'll go backwards first, I suppose, with that. I suppose with the last part of that. It seems like it might be a really good way to unveil mystery in general. So it could possibly be adopted by, you know, something like a murder mystery, maybe. That might be interesting. Murder mystery roguelike, where you're uncovering a different procedural like situation each time. That could be maybe something that is appropriate for it. But yeah, obviously Hades really ran with the idea of just heaps of dialogue, just like endless narrative content, and that has really propelled it a lot for a lot of people, along with obviously the beautiful art and, you know, thirsting for these Greek gods and goddesses. Yeah, it seems to have broken through into sort of mainstream consciousness with its push in those areas.
As we get further into AI-based storytelling, I think that, you know, Dwarf Fortress set not the bar, but started this in motion with procedural generating story. And as our technology gets bigger in the AI space, that really can be brought out. I mean, even now, if you would design a graphical parser and a roguelike system to something that AI Dungeon was putting out, you can create a kind of propelling game. And it's, you know, the stuff with with the AI development is just getting better and better.
Well,
Do you think? Oh, you go.
Go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to ask, do you think the knowledge that it's a generated story changes the way that you experience the game as opposed to having a bespoke story written by a team or a person?
If the story is good enough now. At the moment, and there's kind of a passing of the Turing test almost. If we could get to the point where you can't tell it's a generated story. Or, I think me and Tomo have discussed this before, where you have a partially generated story and a partially scripted story, and you're filling in the blanks with the AI. Not necessarily a Mad Lib. That's kind of really not the way I'm going, but
it's a reductive statement, but it's not wrong.
True.
I think I just want to make the statement that if there is procedurally generated content of any sort, there is procedurally generated story. So we'll start with that. But in the context of Hades, what I find so interesting about it is that it's just what do they call the Supergiant? Mm-hmm. Is that the name?
Supergiant Games.
And the guy without hair, genius. They made every aspect of the game mimic the underlying structure. And so it's sort of like this academic and artistic showing off with respect to some of the structures of these games. I was really blown away by it because I feel like it actually does this thing about like using the story to mimic the roguelike plus legacy, use the action mechanics to mimic the roguelike plus the legacy, like across all its axes. It was absolutely my year of the game that year game of the year that year, just because it was so comprehensively consistent and aligned to like some big statement, right? It's like, it's so good, it's almost a joke. But yeah, to speak to what Seth was saying in terms of, I think the roguelike and roguelite genres are really all about game developers getting excited about playing the role of a neural network trying to create generative stories. And I have no comment about whether it's the right call or the wrong call or what's good or bad about it. But I do think it's like a super interesting space to explore, especially considering how sort of essential to the human experience storytelling is.
Yeah, like I know that game Wildermyth that everyone keeps talking about.
Oh wow!
I need to
so good.
Try and get that one. I've been waiting for it to ever go on sale, so I'll eventually have a chance to play it. But yeah, this idea again of, I think, having these kinds of fixed elements, but then having that space for the procedural or the random generation to really tell these stories. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the evolution of, for anyone who's old enough to remember the original XCOM, the idea of having like after action reports, people telling narrative stories based off of, my one character who, took an 80% shot and miss, and turning that into, like a 5-paragraph novella of how this character would fail because of whatever reason. And there's certainly, I think there is a space here for, not sure how the term I want to use, for I guess trying to like rationalize the roguelike as not just these, elements you could throw in, but like what Tomo was saying, like integrating the roguelike into the story, integrating it into the action, having all these systems kind of respond to the fact that we are playing a roguelike and how this all like fits together.
Interesting. I don't tell myself in my head a story when I'm playing a roguelite most of the time. So it's a very calculated style of game. But when I'm playing a roguelike, more on the traditional side, because I don't play action ones, there is a story going on. You know, if I'm playing Ancient Domains of Mystery or Tales of Mael or whatever it is, you know, I'm telling myself this RPG story going on. So that's it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's all storytelling. Tomo's right. I mean, I was talking about music in the Epic Tavern Discord the other day about the old concept albums of the 70s and 80s and how we could possibly use those as ways to structure story. And Tomo chimes in with, "It's all storytelling." I mean, he's right. I mean, you can make that comment about pretty much anything.
Well, you know, I think from my point of view, it is worth mentioning that kind of my current perspective on what storytelling is information that's been configured into shape that is more amenable to humans remembering it. And it just turns out that these sort of relatable patterns, something that attaches to a character and an arc of transformation, just happens to be, you know, our brains have a high degree of affinity for absorbing information when it's packed into that kind of shape. And so I'm split. I'm split between loving story because we love stories in all the conventional ways, and really interested in studying the idea as like this sort of clinical math analytics perspective about what makes humans work better or worse.
Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell.
Oh, that's the starting point. There's no denying that. It's like, take the dude that studied it a bunch, which, by the way, I love that people like or dislike his results, when ultimately it's just the side effect of his studies.
Time check, we are approaching an hour. I have one final question or one final point, and then I'll throw over to everyone to make their final ones. But one thing that I wanted to kind of ask the table about, maybe for people watching this live record, again, on this mainstream of roguelikes, I think one of the things that we've seen with kind of like the new generation has really been kind of like, I guess, defanging some of these spikier aspects of traditional roguelike design. Because anyone who's played like traditional roguelikes will always know of those gotcha traps, or, you know, something that, you know, if you're not careful, if you hit this, your run is dead. And Share in the Wanderer, stepping on the wrong trap and having your entire inventory be deleted or turned to rice balls. That's it. Like, if you had all your best gear, you're done. And one of the things I think, going back to what Simon was saying earlier about kind of giving the player agency, I think is giving the player, I guess, more rope to get through, or maybe if they're playing it wrong, to hang themselves with. That it's not the case of if one choice ruins my run. It's always like an interesting or cascading set of decisions that can lead to win or lose.
That's something that we've struggled with a bit, actually, because the failure point is spread out, and so it's not obvious that you're failing as you're failing, potentially. So in becoming more accessible, it also becomes a bit more abstracted, the idea of optimal strategy sometimes, depending on the player, and also their game knowledge. But yeah, also, a lot of accessibility through needing less game knowledge compared to a traditional roguelike.
Well, most people don't like losing. You know, we've had this conversation in the strategy casts where, you know, I'm a big proponent of the strongest AI possible that should kick your ass every time. And the counter is no one wants to play a grandmaster of chess. It's just not fun. So being able to work around those death spirals might be an interesting design standpoint. I mean, we're all familiar with, you know, you lose an XCOM before you know it. You know, just you lose your sniper and you think you can carry on and it's just not working. And the same thing happens in a lot of roguelites and roguelikes. I mean, I certainly have seen death spirals in card-based
All
I
turn-based
can't.
strategy games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, should we hold the player's hand and ensure every run is a success? Are we supporting power fantasies? I don't know. Some people want that.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want to, just dominate Isaac or Stellaris or kill Owl.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need the variety of experience to enjoy the highs.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel
I
like people like the idea of it, but in practice they just get bored.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so
Yeah.
true.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and like Seth's saying, like there are people, again, going back to what I was saying earlier about an audience that doesn't like RNG. They don't want a load up game where there's a 40-50% chance they're going to lose every single time they play. And we are like nearing the end of this chat, but we will have to talk about probability and RNG more in a future topic, because that's like several hours easily.
It's literally every 5 streams should probably be about RNG.
Probably, yeah.
Or any of our casts.
Yes, true. And it is a tough line to walk, again, in terms of difficulty. And again, like what Simon was talking about with Ring of Pain, that how much can a player mess up or play suboptimally? Can they still win? And it's a tough question to answer because every game is different. Again, there are some games where if you don't get every single item for your build, you're going to lose. And like I said, then there are games that go the Island Misfit Toys route, where you can get that crazy combination that nothing synergizes at all. And you somehow pull out that miracle, and it does feel like the best damn thing. And I think, again, like I have final points on top of final points, but this will be my final one. I'm going to shut up. That going back to what we say in terms of breaking these games, I think a major charm of kind of this integration of roguelike elements is this idea of the player getting one over on developers, or thinking that they got one over. Haha, I got the lifesteal on top of damage over time on top of this, and my character just beat the entire game. Take that, designers. And no, I program all that. I want you to use that. And it is very, and again, I think that's for a lot of, especially people who grew up playing strategy games or tactical mind ones, this idea of, how do I destroy this game? How do I take all these items and spells and weapons that you've given me, and how do I just completely break this game in two? Like, how do I completely master it with these choices?
Yeah,
I mean,
in the 90s, my roommate used to hex edit the games, and that was how you broke games back then.
Now we do it legitimately, or we do it with the developer's consent. But like I said, I'm not going to give any more final points. We'll be here for another hour or two, so I'm going to let everyone have a chance to give their final thoughts for tonight. So we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Tomo to Seth to Simon.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't think I recognized this at the beginning of the stream, but the roguelike conversation is sort of like trying to analyze like a shape of experience between sort of like mystery and expectation and getting what I want versus having my desires thwarted in a kind of universal way that I don't think I was thinking at the beginning of the stream. I'm sort of blown away by that idea. Like, I love this. My bold claim is that the roguelite genre exploration is game developers going straight for the heart of what makes players tick. I don't know if I can say any of the other stuff I was thinking about saying before the stream started.
When I'm sitting down in front of my Steam library and going, okay, I'm going to play something, a lot of times I will gravitate to a roguelite or a roguelite because the runs are nice, and playing a war game is a major effort. You're sitting there for hours and hours and hours, and the thing about saving it and coming back to it is you forget what you're doing, or it takes 3 months to come back to it, just because of a time constraint. So roguelites are great for that. I think we're seeing a rut in the development. There's very few unique concepts coming through. It's all, okay, we've got new cards, we've got different synergies, we've got new relics. The traditional roguelites or roguelikes are, we've got 100 areas, we've got towns, we've got villages, we've got 6,000 NPCs. It's just more at this point. We need to see that evolution of this genre for it to continue to dominate. It is a pretty dominating genre in the strategy subgenre. And I really like to think that some brainstorming can get us to that next level. Ring of Pain was cool because it was a totally different model than what it flipped everything on its head. And other things have done that. Slay the Spire is probably, the closest I would give a game a 10. Because it is genre defining. And that's what I don't think any game deserves a 10. But it defined what a card-based roguelite would ever be. And I guess you could say the same thing for Isaac Light. That Isaac was the root of things. But there was that first-person shooter where you're caught in a time loop that just came out. What, a Death Loop?
Death Loop, yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't touch on that, but that kind of brings the idea that you were talking about with Hades to a first-person shooter. And that's interesting. It's not my style of game at all, but seeing a unique design is always a cool thing.
Yeah, like you're saying, Seth, I think a lot of modern roguelites have spawned from the idea of simplifying the experience, and also just scope as developers, like being able to make content and then the permutations of the content give the player experience and hundreds or 1,000 hours of replayability. So it's a lot more accessible as a genre to indie developers. And what Slay the Spire did to, Dream Quest was take this interesting deck builder format and then just make it for a mass market sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if it was, I assume it was inspired by Dream Quest because it's quite similar. But
you can say Dream Quest is certainly the father of this style.
Yeah. And now, like you're saying, we're seeing a lot of deck builders that follow that kind of format. And it's interesting that someone in chat said they wanted a roguelike RTS right at the start of this stream. Because RTS is a genre which was highly complicated. It's almost like RTS is the traditional roguelike equivalent, and then League of Legends or MOBAs are the roguelite equivalent. And then it gets even simplified even further. So you take out the micromanagement and get, MOBA, and then you restrict that to just team fights and you get something like ARAM in League of Legends or other games like Battle.Right. And so now we're starting to see classic RTS come back with all its complexity and needing to know that game knowledge. Yeah, it is. And it's kind of the antithesis of what roguelike's done as well. So maybe there is space and demand coming back for adding more complexity rather than just simplifying as we're combining genres to make new formats.
I see that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I certainly agree.
All right. Yep, go ahead.
I just got to say, from the beginning of the stream to the end of the stream, roguelike and roguelite were genre extensions that were really connected to the indie movement, and I would see them from that lens, look through the those games to the indie developers. But Now I think I'm seeing it from the other way around. There's an intent from us indie developers to explore new and interesting things because we want to understand our audiences and make them happy better, and that just happens to be the expression. And I think I was thinking about it the other way around before.
All right. But with that, we are right at time, so we will say goodnight for this episode. And again, if people enjoy this and more topics for us to cover, let us know, and we'll be happy to come back for more roguelike talks. So, as customary, I'll give everyone a chance to do all their plugging and social media that they would like to talk about. So I will start things off. Again, for those of you watching this, do all the liking, subscribing, and commenting to the channel. You'll find information from my Patreon, Discord, and Twitter down below and over there on my overlay. And of course, I stream and talk about game design regularly. And if you're a developer wanting to come on to talk about it, please get in touch. But I'll send it over to Tomo.
So, the thing to plug, we have a game on Steam. It's called Epic Tavern. It is not out of early access, but we hope to get it out of early access this year. And we stream development probably in the near future twice a week, and we have a live dev chat where we can discuss all things on our Discord channel.
All right, down to Seth.
So all my links should be somewhere down there. If you're into strategy gaming, come to my Discord, follow my Twitter, follow my website. We've got a team now that's doing video content as well as written content. And if you like Cold War turn-based strategy games, check out the game I work on, Terminal Conflict. You can find that on Steam.
All right.
Yeah,
And,
check out Ring of Pain if you're interested in a bit of a different puzzle format kind of challenge in the roguelike space. It's on Steam, Switch, and Xbox as well. And yeah, we're also working on prototyping a new thing, which I'll be testing with the community. So if that is of interest as well, our discord.gg/Ring of Pain is where you can get the latest news on that, or follow me on Twitter at sboxel.
all right. So, like I said, we're going to wrap things up for our show. We try to do these roundtables at least once a month, so we'll see where things fit for everyone's schedule next time. But as always, thank you everybody for tuning in, whether you're watching this live or recorded. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And thank you again to Tomo, Simon, and Seth for coming on for our first roguelike talk.
Thanks for having
us.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great chat.
All right, so everyone, have a great rest of your night. You'll see me later for our regular game streams. But for everyone else, see you next roundtable. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
See ya.